Welcome to today's Explainer. Look, if you've been following the news lately, you already know that the landscape of modern warfare is shifting, and it's doing so at an absolutely unprecedented speed. Today, we're going to break down the highly complex engineering and the raw physics behind a massive recent deployment that completely grabbed the attention of military analysts all over the world, the Oreshnik missile. We're going to dive right into exactly how the system operates, the wild technology packed inside it, and most importantly, we're going to contrast this strategic, long-range ICBM design with the tactical Iskander missile. We really need to understand how the architecture of these strikes is fundamentally changing. All right, so let's just dive right in. Here's our roadmap for today. First up, the Oreshnik strike. Then we'll look at the anatomy of an ICBM. Third, evading defenses. And finally, tactical versus strategic design. Starting with Section 1, the Oreshnik missile strike. A new level of saturation attack. 600 drones, 90 missiles. Just let those numbers sink in for a second. This represents the sheer volume of a recent saturation attack that just flooded the skies over Ukraine. But while those staggering numbers really show the chaotic environment in which this weapon was used, they were honestly kind of a screen. The true centerpiece of this strike wasn't your standard cruise missile. It was a weapon known as the Oreshnik, which actually translates to hazelnut.
So what exactly is the Oreshnik? Well, it's an RS-26 Rubej-derived medium-range ballistic missile. Now, in this specific strike, it was fired from the Kapustin Yar test range and targeted Bielets-Tsarkava, a city just about 50 miles south of Kyiv. This is a massive 50-ton nuclear-capable system, and what's really remarkable is how they launch it. The platform relies on these meticulously engineered, highly mobile Soviet-era 12x12 trucks. These massive transport erector launchers, or TELs for short, give the system incredible mobility on the ground, which makes the launch sites literally almost impossible to track.
Moving on to Section 2, Anatomy of an ICBM, specifically focusing on engineering the Oreshnik. Now, what's really fascinating here is how this thing gets off the ground. The Oreshnik uses a stealthy, cold launch system. Now, instead of the rocket engine igniting while it's still sitting inside the launcher, which is called a hot launch, like what you'd see with the American THAAD or Patriot systems, a cold launch uses an initial burst of compressed gas or sometimes a small explosive charge to physically pop the missile right out of its canister. It's only once it's safely up in the air that the main rocket engine actually ignites. It's a brilliantly stealthy technique because it prevents massive wear and tear on the launcher itself, and it drastically minimizes the initial heat signature, which lowers the risk of anyone detecting the launch site. Okay, so once it is actually in the air, the missile relies on a three-stage design. The first stage is made up of mobile thrusters packed with solid fuel that power its initial ascent. Then, roughly 60 seconds into flight, this first stage separates. The protective shroud gets jettisoned, and the second stage fires up. Finally, the third stage takes over, and it's this multi-stage engineering that literally allows a 50-ton weapon to carry a highly concentrated 1.3-ton payload completely out of our lower atmosphere and straight into space in just a matter of minutes. But guys, the payload itself is where the true complexity really shines. The Oreshnik is equipped with a MIRV system. That stands for Multiple Independently Targetable Re-Entry Vehicle. So instead of dropping one giant bomb, this system allows a single missile to carry and deploy about 6 highly sophisticated warheads, which, interestingly, are reportedly based on American designs. And each of these 6 individual re-entry vehicles has its own engine and can actually maneuver independently toward totally different targets. And if we peek inside just one of those 6 vehicles, you'll see it is absolutely packed with tech. Up front, you have the fuse and nose for aerodynamics, followed right behind by the contact sensor and the arming system. Behind that sits the warhead compartment itself, which, as we mentioned, is nuclear capable for strategic deterrence. But the absolute most critical features are tucked in the back: the spin nozzles and gas generator. These provide the thrust for precise mid-air movements. And guiding the whole shebang, a GLONASS antenna, which uses Russia's satellite navigation system to perfectly pinpoint its destination. Which brings us to Section 3, Evading modern defenses. Let's talk about the physics of the strike. So the flight path here follows a high parabolic trajectory that's broken down into 3 phases. We already talked about the boost phase, right? Powering the missile up. Next comes the mid-course phase. While it's traveling unpowered through space, a mechanism literally called the bus detaches from the rocket. This post-boost vehicle maneuvers into position and releases those re-entry vehicles. Finally, we hit the terminal phase, where these independent vehicles plummet back down into the atmosphere completely at the mercy of gravity. And here is the absolute crucial takeaway: Mach 11. Because that last stage traveled on such a massive, high parabolic path into space, the terminal descent happens at a truly staggering velocity. These warheads are falling at roughly Mach 11, which gives them an immense, almost unfathomable amount of kinetic energy. But speed alone isn't the whole story when it comes to evasion. Remember those spin nozzles we just looked at? Well, while they're plummeting towards Earth at Mach 11, these vehicles can actually change direction. This maneuverability is often referred to as a defensive wriggle. It's basically a mid-flight zigzag. Look, advanced defense systems like the US-built Patriot are incredibly capable, for sure, but they are built to calculate an interception point based on a predictable trajectory. They simply cannot calculate, track, and hit a target that's darting around in unpredictable zigzag patterns at hypersonic speeds. It's just too fast and too erratic.
And finally, Section 4, Tactical versus Strategic Design, contrasting the Iskander and the Oreshnik.
So we've deeply analyzed the Oreshnik at this point. But to truly grasp its role in modern combat, we really need to compare it to another heavily utilized weapon, the Iskander missile. So I'll pose this question to you. How does a strategic weapon like the Oreshnik fundamentally differ from a tactical missile like the Iskander? I mean, both are highly advanced, both are incredibly fast, and both are devastating. But they are built around entirely different philosophies of war. Let's break down those core differences. Let's start by looking at their flight paths. The Iskander uses what's called a quasi-ballistic trajectory. It travels at a much lower altitude and sort of blends the characteristics of both ballistic and cruise missiles, allowing it to alter its path unpredictably mid-flight. The Oreshnik, on the other hand, as we've seen, relies on a massive, high parabolic trajectory. It punches straight up into the upper atmosphere, coasts through actual space, and then initiates a sheer, steep, gravity-fed dive. Next up is speed. Honestly, both achieved terrifying hypersonic velocities, which is what makes them so incredibly difficult to intercept. The Iskander operates somewhere between Mach 5 and Mach 7, but because of its space-assisted freefall, the Oreshnik vastly outpaces it, hitting insane speeds around Mach 11 during that terminal re-entry phase. Then we have to talk about range, and this is a massive juxtaposition in scale. The Iskander is a short-range ballistic missile, capable of traveling roughly 500 to 700 kilometers. That keeps its use firmly planted in battlefield-level regional operations. Strategic ICBMs like the Oreshnik, they're designed for extreme, mind-boggling distances. We're talking ranges well over 5,500 kilometers. So these aren't just weapons that can cross a border. These are weapons designed to literally cross continents. And all of that perfectly highlights their ultimate difference in purpose. The Iskander is essentially a tactical system. It's a highly optimized, localized scalpel designed to strike things like enemy air defenses, command centers, and key installations within a specific regional conflict. The Oreshnik, though, is a strategic weapon. It's built for long-range, high-impact scenarios, acting either as a massive global deterrent or as a tool for taking out critical large-scale infrastructure on an intercontinental level. We're literally witnessing a new era right now, an era where both the tactical scalpels and the strategic sledgehammers are achieving evasive, hypersonic speeds that our current defense grids seriously struggle to calculate. So, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. With weapons like the Iskander and the Oreshnik fundamentally rewriting the math of interception, how exactly will global defense systems adapt to survive this? Are we going to have to rely entirely on predictive AI, directed energy weapons, or maybe entirely new paradigms of defense that we haven't even thought of yet? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking the hard questions and keep learning.